We're going to fit 60 minutes of board meeting into a half hour, and we're going to do it with our regulars. State House Majority Leader, Speaker in Waiting, John Diehl. Good morning, Mr. Diehl.
Good morning.
Editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger. Good morning.
Good morning.
Jane Dueker, former Chief of Staff of Governor Holden. Good morning, Jane Dueker.
Good morning.
Tony, we're going to start with you. This Ryan Furgeson story is kind of fascinating, and you have you've been following this from the beginning, haven't you?
I have.
Tell us your thoughts as Ryan Furgeson is set free.
Well, I wrote a column on it in this morning's paper, and you can see it at stltoday.com. This is a very complicated case for me because the man who was murdered, Kent Heithold, was a friend of mine. He was the sports editor at the Columbia Daily Tribune. I was the city editor at the time. And in fact, my wife and I were talking about this last night. I still remember vividly getting woken up in the morning, early morning phone call from Jim Robertson, the managing editor, telling us that Kent had been killed. And when we came to work that day, we were going to have to use a different door. And obviously, as the city editor, was going to have to be involved in the coverage. And, you know, it was a very emotional time. Ryan Furgeson and Chuck Erickson are the two people that got arrested and charged with the murder. I covered the trial and what happened for those who haven't followed it. And it's been on 48 Hours and Dateline and all the different TV cop drama type shows over the last several years. But Erickson admitted that he was involved, implicated Furgeson. Ultimately, Furgeson was convicted, and this week the appeals court overturned that conviction in a fairly rare action because the prosecutor committed Brady violations, didn't share some information with the defense that was potentially impeachable. And I write in the column today that as hard as it is, because during the process of the trial, I covered every minute of the trial, I thought the prosecutor properly convinced the jury. I thought that Ryan Furgeson, based on the process of the trial, was properly convicted in the murder. But there's no doubt, if you read the appeal decision, that the prosecution made mistakes. And there were lots of interesting elements of that. It ever went to trial in terms of overzealous policing, overzealous interviews with some of the defendants and all of that. So here you have a situation now where Ryan Furgeson, the state ultimately has to decide whether or not they're going to retry it. I don't think they can retry it. I think that because two of the main witnesses, including Erickson, who's still in jail for the murder, have changed their stories in Erickson's case several times since the conviction. I think he's going to be a free man, and that's just what happens in our justice system sometimes.
Was he there? I mean, he has always maintained his innocence. What do you think actually happened?
This is part of the complicating factor. Is he's always maintained that he wasn't there, and Erickson, even when he was changing his story and saying Ryan didn't do this, I did this, still said they were both there. So there's all sorts of contradictions. I tend to believe what I heard in the trial. And I believe the trial got to the best version of the truth that we'll ever get to. I am completely open to the possibility that I'm wrong there and that the jurors were wrong. That's a separate issue as to whether or not he should be set free right now. I say in the column today he absolutely should be set free right now because that's our system of justice. If the prosecution fails to do its job and to do it right and to do it fairly, then people need to be set free. That's a bedrock of our system, and that's just the reality.
John, you want to chime in on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a situation. Obviously, Tony's much more intimately familiar with it than Jane or I are, and yeah, it's very tough to armchair quarterback.
Right.
Come back and try to analyze what did or didn't happen. It just strikes me as a tragedy all the way around. One hand, you have what, by all accounts, was a wonderful person that was brutally and senselessly murdered, and
right.
You'd like to see justice. But then, on the other hand, probably the only thing that's just as bad as someone who's put away for the rest of their life for something that they didn't do.
Right.
So I tend to. I put a lot of faith in juries. I put a lot of faith in prosecutors, and it would be a shame if there was something which was held back in this case that, even though it may have been able to be impeachable, may not have had the effect of changing the decision of the jury, and this guy was involved and walks free for that reason. But it seems like it's going to be something that's very difficult to retry, just because of the credibility of the other witnesses. The guy's a convicted felon, so how credible can that
And he's
person
changed his
be?
story. He's,
Right.
are you lying then or are you lying now?
Right.
Yeah, Jane, you have any thoughts?
Well, the one thing that I, because I agree, I don't know the ins and outs. I remember I was in Jeff City when a lot of this was happening, and it was a big story. But I do appreciate the Court of Appeals' attention to this case. The judiciary is sort of the last bastion of justice, and they have to make calls too, and they're not easy. And but I appreciated with the immense amount of detail, the immense amount of legal analysis, the non-political, it's what the judiciary is supposed to do. You may quibble with the outcome, and people may, and I'm sure there will be a lot more discussion about this. But what I have to say is I am very happy. To me, the judiciary did their job and restored faith that this stuff is reviewed carefully, and people are not perfect. Juries aren't perfect. Prosecutors aren't perfect. Judges aren't perfect. But that the amount of care that was necessary for this matter was given. There may not be absolute bad guys other than the murderers, and there may not be absolute good guys. And so I appreciate the way the court sort of dealt with that shades of gray, and again restored faith in the system.
Jane Dueker, Tony Messenger, John Diehl. We'll come back. The board meeting is going to tackle red light cameras. There was a court ruling on that. We'll discuss that next on KTRS. Number one question I get as a talk show host is, what do we do with these red light camera tickets? Well, there was a ruling which is really confusing everybody else. The headlines are that it's now unconstitutional, but it's constitutional, but it's unconstitutional. Jane Dueker, what are your thoughts?
Okay.
First of all, we should say that
I represent the vendor, one of the vendors that do these programs, and I represent the vendor that was in the Ellisville
case
that just came down.
Okay.
First of all, this isn't about the constitutionality. No court in Missouri has ever declared these unconstitutional. So that needs to they're misleading people if they're telling people that there's a constitutional problem with red light camera programs. There's not. What this ruling did that was unique is it's not that the programs are illegal. It's not, you don't get refunds, you don't get a class action. All of that's been settled numerous times by Missouri courts, including this court. 2 years ago, the court held that it would be okay for a city to cite an owner for a public safety violation for their car being present in an intersection when the light's red. This decision, specifically, they changed their mind and contradicted and said, you know what? No, we think under state law, now a statutory analysis. We're not arguing about the validity of red light camera programs. We're arguing about the procedure for the notices and who can be cited. And so my concern is in their zealous, which I'm, good for them, and their zealous sort of advocacy for the ruling in this case, they're telling people not to pay the tickets, not to go to court. That is wholly irresponsible. It is reckless and irresponsible to tell people, you need to go to court. This court reaffirmed, you don't get to just ignore it. You have to go to court. If you have a legal issue...
But what did it rule? What did it rule?
It ruled that you cannot cite the owner. You have to cite the driver. The driver has to be ultimately responsible for a red light camera ticket in this instance.
Okay, so my car is caught with a red light camera. It takes a picture of the license plate.
Correct.
I get the ticket because I own the car. Maybe somebody else was driving.
Correct.
So who pays the ticket?
Well, in the city of St. Louis, you would go in and you would say that there's a rebuttable presumption that owners drive their cars, which has been upheld numerous times even by this court. And the city program has been completely upheld by this court, and the Supreme Court declined review on that. So you would go in and say, I was in China, here's my plane ticket. So then the presumption is busted, and then, you're not guilty if you present evidence. In these sort of strict liability cities.
Do you have to testify against the person who was driving your car?
No, you don't.
Sign an affidavit.
You don't.
So in this instance, I'm guilty until proven innocent.
Well, but they say, you know what, and the theory is it's been upheld all over the country. This is the only state so far that's even had one decision. They had one decision upholding it like the rest of the country, but then now they have this second decision. That you know what, you control your car. You're the one who knows who you give your car to. And it's okay for you to be held liable for your car, just as if you have a house in the city that you rent out and you let dangerous things happen, the city cites you as the owner of the house, whether or not the renter was responsible for the damage and the dangerous condition. It is not uncommon to hold owners liable for their property, especially in civil violations such as muni violations. But they said not from a constitutional standpoint, from a state law concept, you can't cite the owner. Now, given that they've done an intra-circuit conflict, which is, I've never seen it in my career, it's probably very ripe for the Supreme Court to review this, because I think the Court of Appeals is saying, wait a minute, there's enough confusion here that we need to get this procedural rule set. There's no dispute that red light camera programs are legal and they're still going to be here. It's a matter of how we are doing it now. The other issue,
some cities are doing it.
How some cities are
so
doing it.
So Ellisville's doing it wrong.
Maybe.
City
if it's
of St.
upheld.
Louis is doing it correct.
Right. The Supreme Court could adopt the earlier decision. I mean, it's completely conceivable.
Yeah. All right.
So.
I want to get to John Diehl, who's chomping at the bit here.
Well, I simplifying this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, good. Talking points.
There is a state law. I mean, running a red light is clearly a moving violation.
Correct.
Moving violations are governed by state law.
Right.
What the Supreme Court said is that you can't hold
No, the Supreme
the
Court
owner.
didn't rule.
I'm sorry. The
Yeah.
Court of Appeals, which is probably going to go to the Supreme Court, what the Court of
I hope.
Appeals said was that you can't hold the owner of a car responsible for a moving violation of a driver, somebody other than the owner. Okay? Just like you can't hold the owner of a car responsible for a driver of the car that commits a DWI or a speeding ticket.
Well, no, you can be held
Anything
if
else
you
like
have a reason to believe that that person is dangerous. The law
Civilly,
does
not
it all the
criminally.
time.
Not criminally.
Well, but civilly, these are civil. Municipal violations are civil, not
Well,
criminal.
what Supreme Court said, this is a state violation, and it should have been, not Supreme Court, but Court of Appeals said this needs to be referred to the
What
state.
they said
and
is
it's not.
municipal ordinances need to be exact to state law, which
Okay.
is not the law in Missouri.
These two clearly think they're
lawyers.
They're
Right.
getting paid per word.
Right.
We're going to yield the floor for a question to Tony Messenger.
Now that Jane has gotten her billable hour,
Yes.
and
wow.
and let me
Ooh,
me
can't
just,
wait till I
let
get
me
to
just,
say that.
Let me just simplify this.
Please.
Let's
Please.
get beyond. Everybody who isn't being paid by the various vendors hates red light cameras. Let's just
Everybody hates traffic tickets.
understand.
I
that.
hate 'em, too.
We all understand that, and we all, most of us, understand that this is about cash, lots of it, for the municipalities, for the companies making the cameras, all of that. Nobody spends
Freedom.
the amount of money that they're spending to implement these things, and that municipalities are spending to implement these things for safety. They do it for cash. So let's just understand that's why people are so upset about this. There is some safety. We all
like
concede there's a little
65%
safety going on
reductions
there.
in
But that's
violations.
not why they're doing it. They're doing it for cash, and that's why everybody hates it. All of that being said, here's the simplest solution.
Don't break the law.
I'm going to agree with you, Jane.
Oh!
She's trying to get a second billable hour here.
You know what's interesting
but
is
I got a red light camera ticket
Oh boy.
He's not
several
interested.
months ago.
Okay.
I got it in the mail. I looked at it. I remembered the intersection. Now, it's one of these stupid intersections in the city where you get it for basically rolling on a
Right on
red
red.
light, right on red,
Yeah.
Breaking the law.
which I really
That's
think
illegal,
is a mess.
Tony.
But I look at it.
You could
I
change the
remembered
statute.
the time I was there. I remembered that it was probably likely that I rolled on that stop. And you know what I did? I paid the stupid ticket because that's what you do. Unlike certain talk show hosts who believe they are above the law.
Right.
Look, I hate the law. I know it's a cash grab. It's the whole process of it is dirty, but it's not unconstitutional. They will eventually fix it in such a way so that they can get their money in Ellisville and St. Peter's and every place else that wants to take our cash. It's eventually going to get fixed, but you know if you ran the red light, and it's not a good thing to run the red light. I was at the red light camera this morning in Ellisville that is of question on the way here. I was about to take a left turn. The yellow came up, and I'm thinking the whole time, oh my gosh, I got to stop. I
You
stopped.
slammed your brakes. You got
I
rear-ended.
stopped. I did not get rear-ended because I was driving at a
You
safe
need
speed.
to not talk about that in my presence.
But you know, the point is, I do agree with Jane in that it will ultimately get resolved. The Supreme Court will ultimately determine what the parameters need to be, and all of the cities will go and adjust their laws, and billable hours are going to be big on this one.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Tony on some of this, and that it's not about for the cities. It's not about safety.
Oh,
It's about.
I get to respond to this.
It's
by the way.
about money. There are probably very limited cases and intersections where it could be about safety. You know, there are intersections around town where people stack up in the intersection during red lights and cause deadlocks, and having a
And they're not cited.
and having a police officer out there writing tickets only probably increases the problem that's out there. But for the most part, I think cities are seeing this as a cash cow, and the reason that is because I've had some in my office, and they say, "Well, this is about safety, safety, safety." Well, why don't we do an analysis where there's no windfall?
There
And
is
all of a
no
sudden, they don't want to
windfall,
talk
windfall,
about
windfall.
that. Sure, there is.
Now, this is
Hold
the
on
deal.
a second. He's not finished. Are you finished?
Oh, right. You want to have 2 against 1, and I don't get to respond.
I just trying to get
usually it's 3 against 1.
Oh, 3
I
against
do
1.
okay.
You're right, and I'm still beaten.
It's
This
3
is the
against
deal.
1, and you're the only one making money.
Right, yeah. Not for this garbage.
I'm not losing any money. Let's put it that way.
When you get a regular red light running ticket from a police officer in the city of Ellisville or anywhere else, you write the ticket. All is good. You have a violation, whatever.
And then you
get
ultimately
your
plead
lawyer.
guilty to excessive noise.
You plead guilty to excessive noise, and you pay a $300 fine because they know they can get you on a plea for a non-mover. This is actually cheaper than regular tickets. That's what's really funny. So when you talk about cash grab, you're not really being fair. The other item is, unlike the system that's in place now, which is points whatever, we're still seeing now 64% reduction in violations. That's average citywide. In the city of St. Louis, the most dangerous intersections are seeing upwards of 85% reductions. And in the city of St. Louis, 84% of people who get a ticket don't get a second one. Okay, so we're changing driver behavior in a way that's not been able to be done either by more expensive, having more police officers, manning red lights, as opposed to investigating and doing other crimes. So to talk about a cash grab, the cash grab is these pleading all of these regular traffic violations. This is non-discriminatory. Everybody is treated the same. There's no special deal for lawyers. There's no special deals for anybody in getting a plead. Politicians, nobody. You get the ticket, you pay it. And Tony's right. You look at these videos, this isn't situations of, and if you all want to change the statute on turning right on red, that would be great. Because a lot of people complain about that, but that's state law. And cities can't just say, oh, we're not going to enforce it. So that's one issue, and that would help a lot. But I think that the bottom line is you don't have to break the law. There would be no windfall if people stopped breaking the law. So that's the rebuttal to that.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Jane Dueker, Tony Messenger, John Diehl. The parting shots next on KTRS. 9:53, just enough time to talk about Dolores Gunn. You want to comment on Dolores Gunn?
Yes, sort of if we're working on parting shots here. Dolores Gunn is the director of the County Department of Health, and she is a physician. Which is, required. Come to find out that she, and she didn't hide it, but come to find out that she has a second job, that she's moonlighting. And she is an ER doctor in a hospital 2 hours away in Illinois. And so, and obviously, it was sanctioned by the county executive and is sanctioned by the administration. I think that's very disconcerting. I understand that a doctor wants to keep their license up, and so they need to do a certain amount of practicing. And but I also understand that moonlighting 2 hours away is troubling from the standpoint of, for example, during her tenure, we had one of her deputies was stealing millions from the county, right under everyone's nose, and so that makes me concerned that the idea that you have a second job makes me wonder as a citizen and otherwise whether the eye is on the ball here.
Jane, it's hard to get by on a $152,000 a year government job.
and I think, in her defense, she said, she almost implied that this was sort of charitable and low-income care, and which would be great. But the citizens of St. Louis County are paying you $152,000.
There's a lot of low-income care that can be done in the county.
Can be done right here, right in front of everybody. And
for the department that you run.
Absolutely.
And are paid $152,000.
But she does such a good
Absolutely.
job, there's no charitable
Right.
care in St. Louis left to do.
And if you're going to moonlight, and I mean, if this happened in the state, I mean, people would come unwound. Why not keep track of your time? Why not be very careful about, because, she's implying, well, if I do a lot of hours in a week, me being gone on a Thursday is okay. No, I don't think it's okay for the director of the Department of Health to be gone on a Thursday. Because what if, God forbid, something happened at the Bridgeton landfill where they got rid of all the landfill inspectors and she's over at a hospital 2 hours away?
But it's okay on that Thursday, though. She let her deputy just kind of run the requisitions.
Right,
and stuff,
evidently. So this to me is a major problem. And so, the idea that she can't account for her time, for her $152,000 is a problem. She's an exempt employee. But I don't think it's unfair for the county residents to request that their department directors have just one job. And I think that, and I understand she wants to, to keep her medical license up, and that can be accommodated, but it needs to be far more transparent, because it doesn't look good. And it doesn't look good for a department that's been riddled by scandal in the stealing, riddled by scandal with the Children's Trust Fund. If the Department of Health were running smoothly, maybe this would look a little different.
No, even
but
if it were running smoothly, this would be wrong.
I agree.
If you're paid to be a department director in the St. Louis County, that's your job.
And she's not the first doctor to go into public service and has to deal with licensing issues and how to keep it up. There's a pretty clear protocol.
That's Majority Leader John Diehl. That's Tony Messenger, the editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Jane Dueker. The board meeting. Guys, thanks for coming in. This will be up on Facebook, Twitter, at stltoday.com later on in the day. Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure. Pay your red light tickets. That's what Jane Dueker says. And Tony Messenger. It's